Close your eyes and raise your hand. You know exactly where it is. Every finger, every joint, every angle, without looking. That's proprioception, the nervous system's constant map of your body in space. Now remove the nervous system entirely. Remove the brain. Remove every neuron. What you have left is a plant, and plants, it turns out, do the same thing. Deep inside their roots, tiny starch granules drift and settle like an internal compass, telling the plant which way is down, where its weight lies, how it's shaped. Scientists have a name for what this adds up to. They published it in Science, and they still don't fully understand how. For most of scientific history, plants were the passive kingdom, the backdrop to animal life, rooted and reactive, capable of chemistry but not of sensing in any meaningful way. You could study them without ever asking whether they experienced anything. That assumption ran so deep it was barely considered an assumption. Charles Darwin was among the first to challenge it, though not deliberately. In 1880, Darwin and his son Francis published The Power of Movement in Plants, a meticulous catalog of how plants bend toward light, grow against gravity, and wrap tendrils around supports with surprising precision. Darwin called it circumnutation, the slow, spiraling exploration of space that plants perform constantly, blindly searching their environment. He suspected something was directing it. He didn't know what. Proprioception. The word comes from the Latin proprius, meaning one's own. In animals, it's the sense that tells you your arm is extended, your knee is bent, your head is tilted, all without visual input. Specialized cells called proprioceptors send continuous signals to your brain, building a real-time map of your body in space. Cut those signals and you lose yourself. Neurological patients who lose proprioception describe it as being adrift in their own bodies, present but unlocated. Plants have no proprioceptors in the classical sense. They have no specialized sensory cells wired to a central processor. They have, by every standard definition, nothing that should permit this kind of spatial self-awareness. And yet, in 2021, a paper published in Science, one of the most prestigious scientific journals in the world, used the word proprioception to describe what plants do, not metaphorically, mechanistically. The authors described a feedback loop in which plants perceive the shape of their own cells and tissues, and use that information to guide growth. Look up at any tree in full growth. Every branch extends at a specific angle, competing for light, distributing structural weight, navigating the pull of gravity. No two branches are in exactly the same position. Each one grew to where it is through continuous adjustment, a feedback process that required the plant to know at every moment where it already was. There is no foreman directing this. There is no brain issuing commands. And yet, the tree knows. The first piece of the puzzle was found not in bark or branches, but in roots, in specialized cells called statocytes. Inside each statocyte are dense, starch-filled organelles called amyloplasts. They're heavier than the surrounding cytoplasm. When a root changes orientation, these organelles sink, slowly, visibly under gravity's pull, settling toward the new bottom. This is the plant's accelerometer. The settling amyloplasts, called statoliths, push against proteins embedded in the cell membrane, triggering a biochemical cascade. These proteins, named lazy proteins after their role in keeping shoots upright and roots downward, respond to this physical pressure by repositioning themselves. Their movement redistributes a growth hormone called auxin across the plant tissue. Cells on one side receive more auxin than the other. They grow faster. The root bends. This is gravitropism, and it has been known for over a century. But until recently, it was classified as a simple reflex. Stimulus response, cause and effect, no different from a knee jerk. What the newer research revealed was different. The root isn't just responding to gravity when it's disturbed. It's continuously monitoring its own geometry. The angle of the tip, the curvature of the shaft, the precise distribution of mass across the structure. It's not reacting, it's tracking. The second piece came from the surface of leaves and stems, from mechanosensing. Touch a plant quickly and nothing obvious happens. But inside the leaf, within milliseconds, a wave of calcium ions floods the cytoplasm, specialized channels in the cell membrane, mechanosensitive ion channels, most notably a class called MSL proteins, open in response to the physical deformation. Calcium, the universal cellular alarm signal, floods inward. That signal propagates, not through nerves, but through connected cells, across the leaf, down the stem, sometimes through the entire plant. Researchers using fluorescent biosensors have visualized these calcium waves in real time, showing the wave propagating across an entire leaf within seconds of a touch. What they saw looked uncannily like neural activity, not identical. The speed is different, the mechanism is different, but functionally the behavior is the same. Localized stimulus, propagating signal, system-wide response. And then came the science paper, published in 2021 by researchers from 3 French institutions. It described something more subtle than gravitropism and more distributed than touch response. Plants, the authors found, continuously sense the fluctuations of their own cell and tissue shapes. The slight mechanical variations that occur as they grow, as wind moves them, as their own weight shifts. They don't just react to these fluctuations, they use them as input. The feedback loop between perceived shape and growth direction is continuous, adaptive, and, the word they chose carefully, proprioceptive. Proprioception redefined, not as a nervous system function, as a cellular function, not as something that requires neurons, as something that requires only the ability to detect the shape of yourself and to act on that information. 2 explanations compete for how this is possible, and they lead to very different conclusions. The convergent evolution hypothesis holds that plants and animals independently solved the same problem: how to move precisely through a physical world without losing track of where you are. Animals evolved neurons and proprioceptors. Plants evolved statocytes and mechanosensitive channels. Different machinery, same output. Under this view, plant proprioception is a fascinating example of biology finding multiple paths to the same solution. Remarkable, but not radical. It doesn't require us to change what we mean by sensing. It just expands the catalog of mechanisms. The minimal cognition hypothesis is more provocative. Put forward by researchers including philosopher-scientist Paco Calvo at the University of Murcia and ecologist Monica Galliano, this framework argues that proprioception is not merely a mechanism, but a form of information processing, and that wherever sophisticated information processing occurs, cognition is the right word for it, regardless of substrate. Galliano's experiments showed that plants can learn. A mimosa plant, repeatedly dropped from a height and discovering the drop is harmless, stops closing its leaves. It habituates, adjusts its behavior based on past experience, and retains that adjustment for weeks, even after the stimulus stops. This is the behavioral definition of learning. Calvo's framework extends this. Plants integrate multiple sensory streams: gravity, light, touch, humidity, chemical gradients from neighboring roots across time, and use that integrated information to make what he calls decisions. Not conscious decisions, but decisions in the technical sense. Actions that differ from what simple reflex would predict based on context. The counterargument, led by botanist Lincoln Ties at UC Santa Cruz, is that all of this is category error. Plants, Ties argues, evolved fitness strategies that work precisely because they don't require consciousness, memory, or cognition. The mechanisms are real. The analogy to animal cognition is not. Calling it proprioception or learning or decision-making imports assumptions that don't fit. A thermostat adjusts to temperature. We don't call that sensing. The debate has not been resolved. What it has produced is a growing body of evidence that the machinery inside plants is more complex, more adaptive, and more sensitive than the passive organism model ever predicted. Whether that machinery rises to the level of cognition depends on what you mean by cognition, and that question turns out to be one the field hasn't definitively answered. Even for animals, there is a forest in Utah, Pando, sometimes called the trembling giant, that is genetically a single organism. Its 47,000 trees are connected through a root network spreading over 106 acres. By mass, it may be the largest living thing on Earth. By age, some estimates put it at 80,000 years. And by every cellular mechanism described in this video, some version of sensing, of spatial awareness, of feedback-driven self-correction has been happening continuously across those 106 acres for longer than modern humans have existed. We don't know what that is like, or whether it is like anything at all. The question of plant experience may never be answerable, but the question of plant sensing, of what information the plant kingdom is collecting, processing, and acting on, is now firmly scientific. Papers are being published. Mechanisms are being mapped. The vocabulary is shifting. The phrase proprioception without a nervous system was, for most of the 20th century, a contradiction in terms. It no longer is. Biology has a long history of expanding its definitions when nature refuses to fit inside them. The definition of life was expanded when viruses appeared to blur the line. The definition of learning was expanded when octopuses solved puzzles that mammals couldn't. The definition of proprioception may be next. What the plants are doing, down in the roots and along the stems, and through the slow calcium tides that cross a leaf in response to touch. They may not be thinking, but they are, in a word that keeps surviving the debate, aware. Of gravity, of shape, of themselves. The question is what we do with that.